This is part 11 of the I Own an Abandoned Motel series. If you aren't caught up on the rest, a link to the playlist is in the description below. I own an abandoned motel, and you never know when you're going to need a bucket of salt. Written by Wine Dark Sea, 1239. We practically stumbled out the boat, aching, stunned, and tired. My first order of business was getting Renee inside and away from the coming dawn. He had healed considerably in the boat as we rowed back to my dock, but was still weak. I slipped his arm over my shoulder and helped guide him back to the cottages. Jake walked beside us, looking in disbelief around him. I'm not used to being here when it's not a full moon. Did you ever even go inside Cottage 13? I asked. Maybe once or twice. Sometimes I've slept on the porch, waiting for dawn. Well, it's yours if it's in decent enough condition for you. I'm sure it's better than what I'm used to. Thank you. I need to help Renee. Go take a rest. He nodded. I brought Renee back to my cottage. I'm fine, he said weakly. I'll just get back home now. There's no way you'll be able to get there in time. Just get inside. I have blackout shades. He mumbled some form of protest. I brought him into my bedroom and lowered him into the bed. Not the way I thought I'd see the inside of this room. He chuckled with a smirk. I threw a pillow at him, feeling my face turn red. Stop it. Just rest in here today. Where will you sleep? You need rest too. I'm not the one who would fry to a crisp if I slept on the couch. Fair. It was a bit jarring to see him in a state of weakness. What if the fire had lasted a bit longer? What would I have done if he had truly died? I brushed the thought away before it could hurt me. With so many real things to worry about, why stress about the imaginary? I sat on the bed, overwhelmed with unease. Renee? Yes. He sat up, leaning on his forearms. You're going to be okay, right? He smiled. Perfectly fine. Just need a good day's sleep. I'm really happy to hear that. I placed my hand on top of his. He looked up at me, pulled me down towards him, and kissed me. I kissed him back. And for a couple blissful moments, there was nothing else. All too soon, we separated, and he lay back down on the bed. I must soon sleep, but do not be alarmed if I appear, well, dead. I smiled and rose, putting my hand on his shoulder as I did. I turned off the lights, checked the blackout shades once more, and closed the door. The sun glowed on the horizon, sending out colored bands of oranges, pinks, and yellows across the sky. I managed to sleep a few hours on the couch, but I woke up hungry and caffeine deprived. My fridge was still empty. I finished the last cubes of cheddar and managed to toast a piece of stale bread into edibility. Some shopping was certainly in order. I decided to go to my favorite big box store, the one everyone knows with the bullseye, even though it was over a half hour away in Watertown. The utter normalcy of the place was like a salve. Everything was red and fluorescent, and I happily picked up far more than what I had came for, including some men's clothing and plenty of raw meat. I made my way to the self-checkout area, feeling more normal than I had in weeks. My item scanned with a pleasing beep, and I noticed a woman next to me, picking up some diapers with a jovial, chubby baby clinging to her hip. His mother kissed his forehead, and the baby nestled his head on her shoulder. I smiled at them. That will never be you. A voice hissed behind me, crawling around the back of my neck. I turned to find the store employee overseeing the checkout area, grinning vacantly, her eyes dull, her lips cracked and stretched too far, exposing black teeth. As I stared at her, her face began to rot, turning a putrid green before the flesh began to slough off. I was frozen to my spot, unable to look away. The checkout machine made a discordant noise, indicating I had not put an item in a bag, and I was finally able to blink and shake my head. You have to put the item down before scanning the next item, ma'am. The employee droned. With astonishment, I saw that she was completely normal, her voice brimming with boredom. I swiped my credit card, gathered my bags, and quickly exited the store, shaken to my core. She's playing with you, I thought, just as with Renee and Jake. I got in my car and checked all around me, especially my mirrors, but there was nothing there, and the ride home was thankfully uneventful. I was back at the cottages by mid-afternoon. Jake was outside smoking a cigarette, a large bucket at his feet. I handed him a bag of clothes and a bag of meat. That probably should last you, I said, laughing. He looked into the bags, and his face erupted into an almost childlike grin, genuinely touched. Wow, this is really great. Thank you. You're welcome. I have something for you too, he said, placing the bucket before me. It was filled with water in which a perch swam. My stomach sank. It was time for the next payment. How did you know? I asked. When I woke up, I went over to your cottage to check on you. You weren't there, but the door was unlocked. I saw the notebook on the coffee table and couldn't help myself. Just like old times, I guess. Only this time, I'm a little better at fishing. You found Martina's fishing rod? I thought that was locked in the basement. Oh, I didn't need the rod. Just grabbed the perch. With your bare hands? He nodded. I noticed the sleeves of his worn sweater were soaked. Ah, yes. Very normal. Okay then, care to help me confirm receipt of payment tonight, for old time's sake? Last time, the wet lady almost killed me, so I'd appreciate some backup. The wet lady, huh? I guess I never thought of her like that before. That was the name I gave her when she haunted me as a child. His face fell. This time, I'm not going to fuck it up. I promise. Stop feeling guilty. I have plenty of other things to freak me out now. I explained how the witch had frightened me at the store, how I feared she would be waiting for me in every mirror until I went mad. Jake listened and nodded. I know he understood. What do you know about the wet lady anyway? I asked, eager to change the subject. Well, it's not like we had a club for all the entities roaming around Colin's cottages, he chuckled. But the mistress, the witch, did love to talk about the thing you call the wet lady. It pleased her endlessly, as did any sort of great suffering. We still have a couple of hours before sunset. Let's get out of the cold and chat inside. We relocated to my cottage, where Jake sat on the couch, while I perched myself on the lone bar stool at the kitchen counter. You know, back during Prohibition, this whole area was a hotbed of smuggling and rum running from Canada, Jake said. I remember my grandfather talking about it. Lots of unsavory characters would occasionally stay at the cottages when he was a little kid. Indeed, and that's where the story of the wet lady begins. No, You have to remember, this is my retelling of the witch's story. She loved to force me to transform and make me lay at her feet while she amused herself with her own wicked deeds. However, I still think I received a better fate than that of Muriel Davis. Muriel was a plain farmer's daughter, growing up on a patch of land just outside Gouverneur, on the eve of the Great Depression. Muriel, like many young people, wanted a more exciting life than what her parents should offer her. She had heard tales of the riches and dancing and romance that could be found in Clayton and in other towns on the river. Willing to do anything to escape her dull fate, she listened carefully to the old ladies in her village tell tales of an old witch who could grant all types of wishes to those brave enough to offer her sacrifice. Muriel didn't care that the tales always ended with tragedy. She thought she was smarter than the rural rubes around her. So, at midnight one night, she went to a crossroads, cut her palm with a knife, and pressed it into a bleached chicken bone she had stolen from the kitchen. The witch appeared to her as a glamorous woman arrayed in the latest fashions, the very type of woman poor plain Muriel so desperately desired to be. "Make me beautiful like you," the girl blurted out. The witch smiled indulgently. With an elegant twist of her hand, a glass bottle appeared. "These are salts for the bath. Use them, and you will become beautiful. But be sure to only use them twice. And as with all such powerful things, girl, there is always a price. If you bathe with these, you will never conceive a child. Do you understand?" "Yes, I don't care about that anyway. Just give them to me." "Very well." Muriel took the bottle eagerly from the witch's grasp. The witch studied the girl in front of her, but the girl failed to notice the malevolence in her eyes. With a gust of wind, she was gone, and Muriel practically ran back to her parents' home. She drew a bath in her mother's tub almost immediately and sprinkled the salts across the top of the water. She stepped in the bath and made sure she submerged every bit of her body. The witch hadn't told her how long she should take, so she stayed in the bath until the water was freezing cold and her fingers had wrinkled. When she had finished, she observed herself in the mirror with delight. Her eyes were larger and more luminous, the color more a vibrant green hazel than the brown she had found so boring before. Her lips were fuller, her face chameleon. She nearly shouted in happiness. Her parents did not notice her change. They had the gall to insist she complete her work on the farm, just as before. Infuriated, that night she drew a bath again, despite her mother's admonition against such an extravagance. This time, she emerged from the bath even more beautiful than before. So beautiful, she thought, that she rivaled the witch herself. That part in the retelling always made the witch howl with laughter. Muriel put on her best dress and stole her mother's best coat and a pair of pearl earrings. She stole away in the night on one of her father's horses, abandoning it just outside of Clayton, the last vestige of her old farm life left behind. There, with her newfound beauty, she soon made new friends. Among them was a man named Carl Simpson, the rakish leader of a local group of alcohol smugglers who had made a tidy fortune with their frequent excursions across the river to Ontario. Carl and Muriel fell madly in love and eloped only days after their first encounter. For several years, life was everything she dreamed of: money, prestige, and the adoration of a handsome, powerful man. Carl showered his wife with jewelry, and furs, but his more and more frequent gifts were hiding a secret. Carl had begun an affair with another woman. In fact, his mistress gave birth to a healthy daughter. And suddenly, Muriel began to doubt her decision to so lightly throw away her chance at having children. She found out about the affair, of course. It filled her with fury to imagine her husband sneaking away to another family, bouncing another woman's child on his knee. Hate and jealousy consumed her. Carl attempted to mollify his wife by booking a cottage for the weekend at Colnan's, a pretty cottage with a lovely river view. Muriel acquiesced, but in a moment of weakness, she had packed that little glass bottle the witch had given her all those years ago. You see, she had become obsessed with the idea that her husband's wandering eye was due to the fact that she was not beautiful enough. She remembered the witch's admonition against using the bath salts more than twice, but her desperation had reached its breaking point. Surely, just one more bath couldn't be that bad. That night, while her husband dozed on the front porch, she prepared one last bath. She shook off her fine lace negligee and stepped in, being sure to soak herself from head to toe. At first, the bath was familiarly soothing, but then she began to feel itching on her hands and legs, as though she was developing a rash. She raised her hands out of the water, and to her terror, large layers of skin were slowing off. Her hands were a decrepit shade of gray, as though they were rotting. She screamed, and the pain intensified. All over her body, the skin was decaying. Her eyes burned, most of all, then finally shriveled into nothing. Her world went black, her face destroyed, her body an abomination, but still she lived, or rather existed. She crawled out of the bathtub with a terrible shriek, no longer the cry of a human woman. She could sense her husband just beyond the door. He flung it open, calling her name, but seeing what was waiting for him inside, he shouted in terror and ran out. She cried after him, her every movement in agony. She felt the change in air and knew she was outside. Her husband ran straight into the river and began to swim. She followed him into the water and caught his ankle. Surprised by her own strength, she propelled herself forward and clamped her hands around the neck of the husband who had so wronged her. In a fit of rage, she squeezed the life out of him. Carl Simpson's body was found weeks later off the coast of Cape Vincent. Authorities suspected that he and his wife had been the victims of a rival gangster. Of course, her body was never found. Muriel, or the thing that was left of Muriel, crawled back to shore, her mind already warped and twisted by madness. She reached out blindly in the night, her hand finally catching on the smooth silk of an elegant shoe. "You poor stupid thing," said the witch, triumphant. "Look what you've done to yourself." The witch glanced at the ground around her and spotted 2 smooth blue marbles that were dropped by your young grandfather at play that morning. The witch blew on the marbles and placed them in the empty eye sockets of Muriel. Muriel could see once more the glassy, curved vision of a fish. The witch cursed the cottage in which Muriel had disobeyed her and burdened your family with maintaining her miserable existence. The rest of the story you know all too well. But why does it seem she has it out for me in particular? The witch would always say that the wet lady had an almost unlimited reservoir of hate. Her human mind was long since eroded away. Nothing is left but that jealousy which drove her to self-destruction. She saw you, a young girl, full of hope and brightness, and wanted to destroy you. She saw you again as a young woman, with the beauty that she had thrown away in greed. I think it's that simple." Jake sat back inside. It was hard for me to imagine the wet lady as anything more than my childhood boogeyman. And yet, at one time, she had been a human with hopes for the future, however misguided. "We have to end it, Jake. We have to end it tonight." He nodded. "I'm all ears." "Good, because I think I have a plan." Renee emerged from the bedroom as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon. To my astonishment, his brown hair was long, hanging just at his shoulders. My face must have registered my surprise, because he began to look concerned. "Your hair, it's... A look of recognition came over him, and he laughed, slightly embarrassed. "Ah, yes. Men did not have short hair in the 18th century. I am, and will always be, exactly how I was on the night I was turned." "Are you telling me you cut your hair short every single night?" "Yes, unless you like it better this way." I politely informed him I preferred his hair shorter. He laughed and pretended to be offended. "I'll take care of it right away then." I tossed him a bag of clothes I had bought earlier. "Thought you needed a slightly more reliable method of obtaining clothing other than, you know." "Thank you. Very thoughtful." "Also, I have to make a payment to the wet lady tonight, but don't worry. Jake is going to help me." He looked carefully at Jake, then at me. I could tell he would prefer to accompany us, but was holding back out of respect for my judgment. I know. You'll be here in case anything goes awry." Took the words right out of my mouth. And so, shortly afterwards, I found myself once more in front of Cottage 9, Jake just out of sight. My heart rate increased. I felt a tightening in my chest. I sloshed around the water in the bucket and deposited it on the ground with a thud. As with my previous encounter, scratching and scurrying noises from inside the cottage announced her arrival. I gripped the marbles in my hand as the wet lady appeared before me, devouring the fish whole. I pushed down the feeling of nausea rising in my stomach. Whereas before, she was the object of my nightmares, the face that haunted me at night. Now, I watched the pale, blind, rotting thing before me, almost impassively, an object of profound pity. "Muriel?" I said quietly, extending my hand out with the marbles in my palm. Her head jerked towards me, empty sockets focused in the direction of my voice. I was surprised she did not let out an ear-piercing shriek. Instead, she cocked her head, as though confused. "Muriel," I repeated. "That was your name once." The wet lady emitted a pathetic moan of recognition. For a moment, she stood facing me, and I felt the hate building inside of her, the unquenchable rage. She lunged at me, her arms outstretched, but Jake was faster. He leapt forward with a giant bucket of salt and dumped it on top of her. She shrieked, a wretched cry of agony. Her rotting skin hissed and sizzled until it melted away to nothing. She fell to the ground, and I was pushed aside by a gust of something leaving the body and escaping towards the sky. The atmosphere around us lightened. The night was peaceful once more. Before us was a set of lifeless bones. I don't know where Muriel would have wanted to be buried. Her parents' farm was abandoned in the 1960s, a small family cemetery overgrown and unloved. Her husband was buried with his people down in Oswego, and I thought that she certainly wouldn't have wanted to be buried on the motel grounds, her place of torment for nearly a century. Renee found a place on a forested hill just outside of Clayton, the town where she had known her only happiness. He buried her there with a modest stone. He had not known when she was born or how she would have wanted her name to appear. We decided on something simple. Muriel, now at peace.